Okay, we're live. You can go ahead and start the meeting, and then we'll try and get Julio to join in.
Okay. This is the Finance and Audit Committee meeting of Monday, June the 8th, 2020. I will call the meeting to order at 6:09 p.m. Roll call, please.
Member Frank Parks? He's present, but he's muted.
Unmute, Frank.
He's here. I'm going to mark him as present. Member Steve Cooley?
Here.
Member Bill Bengesa?
Yeah.
Vice Chair Richard Beneke?
Here.
Chair Baron Janetti?
Here.
Councilmember Carroll?
Here.
Councilmember Martinez? He is here. We're going to patch him in.
At this time, we will do the Pledge of Allegiance. Everybody can have themselves on mute, but I'll begin. Place your hand over your right of your chest, your left, excuse me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. Action of any requests for excused absence? None. Approval or adjustments to the agenda? Anybody have a conflict of interest disclosure? Okay, at this time, Nicole, I'm gonna do the public comment period right now for items not on the agenda. Due to the circumstances, we are encouraging members of the public to maintain participation in our meetings by submitting any public comments via email or by teleconferencing in for phone-in comments. Please see the front of the agenda for specific directions. Are there any requests to speak?
We do have an attendee in here. I'm going to go ahead and unmute them.
Hello, do you have any comment that you want to make? Okay. Action items, public hearings request. Number 1, approval of our minutes from our meeting of May 11th. Are there any requests to speak about those minutes?
Move to approve.
Okay, I didn't have anybody request to speak. We have a movement to approve.
Second.
Second. Before we go through a roll call, is there any discussion at all or comments? Okay, a roll call, please.
Member Frank Parks?
Yes.
Member Steve Cooley?
Yes.
Member Bill Bengesa?
Yes.
Vice Chair Beneke?
Yes.
Chair Janetti?
Yes.
Councilmember Carroll?
Yes.
And Councilmember Martinez?
Yes.
Item number 2, fiscal year 2020 general fund and wastewater fund update through April 2020. The recommended action is to receive and file this. Staff report, please. Jeff, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. This is something that we try and do monthly. We've only missed 1 month, I think, along the way. But what you have in front of you now is 2 different schedules. The first one is for the general fund, and then the second we'll go through is the wastewater fund. This takes you through 10 months of the year, or 5/6, if you will. As the committee has requested, I have a column on the right side that attempts to estimate where we're going to end up. So basically try and do some level of accrual to get you to what we think will be the finish line, or at least close to it. So if you Will, I'll take you through the general fund briefly, and then we'll do the same with the wastewater fund. I'll pause in between for any questions or discussion. As far as the general fund, we are tracking to exceed, basically to have a surplus. Most of that surplus, in fairness, is related to the $5 million one-time solid waste fee that we received for the retention of that contract. But despite that, we think we are going to have a surplus of around $900,000 from operations. Earlier, I would have thought that surplus was going to be probably, if you'd taken us back before COVID, I would have thought that surplus over the $5 million one time would have been closer to $2 million. We've taken some hits in a number of areas. Sales tax probably being the most prominent, but also in transient occupancy tax, which is our hotel tax, and permitting, some of our development related activities dropped off a bit, and then also in our business licenses. So we've seen some drops that we expected over the last couple of months. The good news is that we did get our sales tax numbers in for March, and they came in a little bit higher than we expected. So that was very pleasing. And so even though that's not reflected in these numbers, I do expect that if that trend continues for April and May, we'll see the numbers get a little bit better than this. Going down through, I talked a little bit about business license. We do expect to get some, our renewal period in May and June, get some higher payments. That's the growth you see in that. I'm not quite confident how that number is going to end up. So that is a swag at this point in time. When we go forward, looking at some of the other revenues all the way down to our transfers, most of the transfers we do make near the end of the year. It's something I intend to rectify going forward in fiscal year 21, where I'm going to try and make quarterly transfers from all sources. The major transfers that we have, not really detailed here, are from CFD funds. So that's probably 3/4 of it. And then gas tax is the other big one. We have a couple of other small transfers that come in. We have made some of those transfers, especially for gas tax. But as you can see, most of those transfers will happen near the end of the fiscal year in June. So our overall revenues are trending to be just around $37 million, which is a bit lower than our budget. But as we'll talk about in a moment, so are our expenditures. Moving down to the personnel services on the expenditure line, we are tracking a little bit below budget there. I'd say well below budget, if you will. Our budget was about $19.7 million. I believe we're going to end up somewhere around $18.2 million. Most of that savings is in the salaries and wages, but some of it is also in the benefit side of the equation. What we have there is vacancy savings. We've been holding some positions vacant since COVID started, and that is contributed towards additional savings there than we would have forecasted a couple of months back. That's offset to some small degree by some workers' comp claims that have come in excess of what our budgeted number was. But the bottom line is we're about $1.5 million under budget in this particular major expense category. Moving down to operating costs, we believe those costs are going to be under budget to the tune of about $400,000 at about a little under $12.1 million. We have savings in a few different areas, utilities. We have some savings in the contractual services, and then some savings in some special departmental services. Bottom line is we're going to be a little bit under budget there. This number might actually creep down a little bit from where it is now. I have projected some higher expenditures in June because traditionally we have had some costs come in. Expenditures generally rise in June. If that doesn't materialize, we might have some additional savings in this category. The rest of it, we have purchased some vehicles, moved some money over from that we didn't get done last year, specifically in the police department. So you'll see that's a little bit above budget on vehicle purchases. And then lastly, right now we have not spent the contingency dollars, and so you've got some savings. There. So bottom line at the end of this is, I expect that our surplus from the general fund to be between 5.6 and $6.3 million. Right now, I'm targeting about 5.9. But again, if our expenditures come in a little lower, that could be better. Sales tax has creeped up a little bit beyond what we're currently projecting, so that's good news. And we may get to the upper end of that surplus projection. And with that, I'll stop and answer any questions.
We have any public comment, Nicole?
I'm going to try and go back to this phone call one more time and see if they have a public comment. Chris, can you unmute, please? Can you hear us? Do you have any public comment?
No.
Okay, thank you. Committee, I'll start with Steve. Do you have any comments to make or questions?
No comments, no questions.
Okay. Richard?
No comments, no questions.
Frank?
No comments, no questions.
Mr. Bengeza?
No comment.
Councilperson Carroll?
Thank you. Very good report, very thorough, but I do not have questions for it. Thank you,
Okay.
Joe.
Thank you.
Councilmember Martinez?
No question, no comment. Thank you.
Okay, I have just one thought. You know, we made a budgetary contribution to the Cherry Festival organization, which was canceled this year for $100,000. Where will that money go? Does it come back? Do we save it in any way or anything, Jeff?
So we have requested those funds back, and I will have to follow up with Elizabeth Gibbs. She's the one that is the lead on that because she has the relationship. And then I'll be able to report back next month on that. But we did request the funds back. Whether we're going to receive the funds or extend it as a credit to next year, I haven't heard the final disposition on that.
Okay, because that would be another 100,000 to the surplus. Okay. Do I have a motion to?
Well, let me go through the wastewater if I could
Excuse
first.
me. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, that's fine. I just wanted to take a moment to go through that. We have similarly good news. As you recall, last month and a couple of months prior to this, I had been projecting a small deficit of $100,000 to $200,000 in this fund. And I'm pleased to tell you that I'm now projecting a $200,000 to $300,000 surplus. In fairness, my newness, I didn't understand the revenues quite enough to know that we were going to get that the second half of the year was going to come a little bit higher. So I'm now projecting, whereas initially I thought we were going to be slightly under budget on the revenues, I'm now projecting that we're going to be a bit over budget, which is we're going to exceed the revenue target. Part of that is due to some collections that came in later in the year, but also because we're adding houses and we're adding development, and as that comes in, it builds our tax base. So we see the revenues coming in at a little over $10 million. And then we're also seeing some savings on the personnel side of the equation. As you can see, we budgeted just under 1.9 million, and I think we're going to trend to be between 1.5 and 1.6 million on the actual expenditures. The second piece of that is in the operating costs, where despite projecting some additional higher expenditures in the last 2 months of the year, it does still look like we're going to be under budget there. The flip side is we pretty much spent our contingency dollars out. City Council approved an item on the last session, and they're with that we about spent out the contingency funds, or expect to. Lastly, transfers includes two major elements, and that is our debt service, which services the wastewater bonds. And then the second piece is actually capital improvements, where we transfer money to our other fund where we handle the capital elements of the budget. And we expect to have that at about 4.7, between 4.7 and 4.8 million at the end. Your net result is a projected surplus of about $297,000. And that's, as I mentioned, a nice improvement from where I thought we were going to be a couple months back at having a deficit and chewing into our reserves. As the committee may be aware, we have reserves in this fund of over $6.5 million. And so that chewing into it by 200,000 was not, a serious matter, but it's certainly nice to add to those reserves and not take away from them. And with that, I'd be happy to answer questions.
Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that. Do we have any questions? Public questions?
I don't have any new attendees and no comments.
Okay. Comments from the committee. Steve, I'll start with you again. That's the way I'm looking at you on the screen. Steve first.
No comments, no questions.
Okay. Richard?
On the proprietary revenue, is that revenue primarily from the fees that each individual parcel owner pays to the sewer fund?
It is. That's precisely what it is. Yeah, it is homeowners and our businesses.
Okay, so the increase probably to a certain extent is due from the increase in the fees, which occurred, 6, 7, 8 months ago? And now they're starting to project themselves. I would assume they're starting to project themselves and people paying the bills, and because the bills are, they're paid like every other month. So that's probably where you're seeing the increase in some of this revenue. So we need to make sure that we're aware of these increases and that it's not newfound money. It's just money that was expected all along, basically.
Yeah, no, I think you're right on target there. That we had built in the 5% increase, and so right now we have under our current planning for this revenue, we have a 5% increase built in each year for the next few years, and that was incorporated into your $9.8 million budget. But we are seeing some additional growth and some houses that are coming in, and then also on the commercial side, we're seeing some growth as well. So we're over budget by we're going to be over budget by about 150,000. That's not a huge amount, but it's quite good compared to where I thought we were going to be, which is going to be 100 or 150,000 under budget. So,
Okay, thanks, Jeff.
you bet.
Frank?
No comment.
Okay. Mr. Ben-Geza?
No comment.
Councilperson Carroll?
Thank you, Chair. So, all right, I just want to clarify that point, Jeff. So you built in the 5% increase, which is the increase in the sewer rate that Member Beneke was referring to. And then on top of that, nothing should ever, I guess, be called found money. But on top of that, what you mean is the additional revenue was for new residential, new commercial, et cetera. And that was growth, right?
That's correct.
Thank you. I wanted to make sure I knew that it was divided up that way. Thank you.
You bet.
Councilperson Martinez?
Yeah, just real quickly, on the, and I'm sorry, I just lost the page on my computer, but from what I remembered, on the operating costs for personnel, it looks like the personnel's under, of course, budget. Remind me, is that because we haven't filled some positions that were budgeted for?
Well, we did
That's
have
why
some, we had a few months of vacancies during the fiscal year. I think the positions are either, if they're not full now, they're on their way to becoming full. But we have a few months of vacancies built into there. But also, you know, it depends on the timing where you bring people in. We always budget at one level, and then sometimes you bring people in slightly under or at a different level than you've budgeted. So it could be a differential there. I haven't explored this one in detail, so I can't tell you precisely what's creating the savings. Certainly there's some vacancy savings in there. There might be that we've budgeted the position at a little higher level and brought it in a little lower in some areas as well. I do know that we're still in the process. We had to do a little realignment with some of the position costing between wastewater and public works, and there still might be a time to play in that as well. But at the end of the day, you're probably going to be about $200,000 under budget on the salaries and wages piece.
Okay, and the reason I just wanted to ask that is because I think we still needed to fill some things that were duly necessary. And with having that still open in the budget, it won't look like we're adding more to the budget to cover costs because they're already built in there. We just haven't used them. So that was my concern to bring that out. So if you could just kind of research that a little bit for the next one, I'd appreciate that one.
Yeah, I will, and you're correct on your assessment as well. I'll get a little bit more refined on that and have the information next time around.
All right. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I have no questions. I'm looking for a motion to receive and file.
So move.
Okay, Mr. Beneke, second.
I'll second.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Roll call vote, please. Nicole?
Member Parks?
Yes.
Member Cooley?
Yes.
Member Bengesa?
Yes.
Vice Chair Beneke?
Yes.
Chair Janetti?
Yes.
Councilmember Carroll?
Yes.
Councilmember Martinez?
Yes.
Okay. Item number 3, citywide grants update. We're to receive and file this. Staff report, please. Jeff?
Actually, I think Christina Taylor is going to take you through this one.
Okay, thank you. My mistake. Christina?
Good evening, Chairman and committee members. I'm Christina Taylor, Community Development Director, here with you this evening to provide a report and some information to you guys about citywide grant activity from each of our departments. So the city of Beaumont and the departments continue to seek state and federal grant funding in an effort to supplement project costs as well as offset expenses to the general fund. The report you have before you this evening provides an overview of grants that have been awarded, some grants that are in progress, and then some grants that have been applied for that we're waiting to hear whether or not will be awarded. It highlights some grant awards that will fund programs in future years. You see that in particular with transit and public works. Each of the city's departments do work diligently trying to secure the funding, and especially now with the recent happenings economically, we're looking to expand our grant funding opportunities. So with the spreadsheet included, you have the details about each of the grants. There are 6 city departments that have active grants. The total value of what we're dealing with currently is just over 6 million, I think about 6.6 million. And we're anticipating 3.2 million in grants for future year project funding. So with that brief report this evening, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have about grants within the city, about what's on the spreadsheet, or anything else that you would like to see come back to you maybe in the future.
Thank you, Christina. Nicole, is there anybody that requests to speak, public?
Let me double check with this caller and see if they have a comment on this item or the next. Can you hear us? Do you have a public comment on this item or the next? Okay. It doesn't sound like it.
No comment? Okay, I'll move to the committee. Steve?
No comments, no question.
Richard?
Christina, it's a great report. It's, I didn't realize Beaumont was so engaged in their grant efforts, and it's good to see. I was just wondering on the report, if you could kind of spell out the agencies that you're writing the grants to.
Yes. Of course. We, with Excel spreadsheets, as you can see, we try and keep them as succinct as possible, which does require the use of acronyms, but I'm happy to go through and give you some information on those. So starting at the top with the planning grants, which is handled through my department. So we have planning grants. HCD is Housing and Community Development, and that's the state of California department. The Parking Strategies grant that we were awarded is from SCAG, and that's the Southern California Association of Governments. A lot of the grants that you see will come through from federal or state funding down to our local regional bodies such as WRCOG or SCAG or any of those. For community services, we have CDBG, which is Community Development Block Grant funding. Right now, those funds are dedicated primarily to Rangel Park, and council also awarded some grant funding to a couple community groups that do work within the city. And the city averages right now, I think we're getting somewhere between $155,000 and $175,000 a year in CDBG grant funding that council gets to determine what we will use it for. And then down in transit, a lot of this funding comes from the state to various agencies. You have the LCTOP, which is the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program. And the idea with this program is to reduce emissions in transit vehicles such as buses and vans and whatnot, while still expanding the opportunity for transit and for the residents in whatever jurisdiction is being served. You have MSRC, which is the Mobile Source Reduction Program. And this is through, we see it in Southern California through the AQND program. The Air Quality Management District has a lot of programs. They have an Mobile Source Reduction Committee. They work with CARB, which is the California Air Resources Board, which is another state board that receives funding that then passes that through and either runs programs themselves or passes it through to agencies like the Air Quality Management District here in Southern California. We have SCIP, which is the, the Statewide Committee on Infrastructure Programs. And you see that is for the electric vehicle charging station. So the purpose of that program is to help municipalities put in infrastructure that will then help serve whatever the goal is. So in this case, emissions reduction. So you can see we've coupled MSRC funding with SCIP funding. The goal there is to reduce emissions and reduce pollution. And so by putting in that EV charging station, we would do that. We're then having the ability to serve electric vehicles, which theoretically have less pollution than other types of vehicles. Moving on down, the State of Good Repair, that is administered through RCTC, so Riverside County Transportation Commission. And you see that has a lot to do with vehicle maintenance and modernization. So keeping our buses and our transit vehicles in good repair, running well, running efficiently. And then on down, you have the STA projects, which is basically state transit assistance. And that's sort of a wide array of funding, as you can see in the purpose column of the things that can be funded. So some of that to the CNG station, You have maintenance and operations. We have the ability to do some branding and updating, things like that. So sort of a much more broad funding opportunities there.
Right.
And then PD, I probably worked the least with these PD programs, but I think they actually provided some very good information. So you can see what they've used for. So the homeless grant, obviously pretty self-explanatory there with addressing homelessness issues within the city. The JAG program, ballistic helmets, SLESA technology. We have BVP, which is the ballistic vest purchase program. And then OES, your Office of Emergency Services. And then we have some school resource officer funding and PAC and RAID, which I cannot speak to those specifically. I don't know if Jeff can answer what those are for.
Yeah. Well, no, I appreciate the rundown, and it seems most of these are state or local, locally funded grants.
Yes.
Do you delve at all into looking at federal grants?
So we do look at federal grants where we see the opportunity for federal funding. Typically, you see that with large scale transportation projects or public works projects.
Right.
So it doesn't necessarily come down to the planning or community services or anything like that. You might see some for transit, but it's typically speaking to infrastructure and large scale transportation projects. And I believe, I don't want to misspeak here, but I believe that we're looking into some of those federal funding opportunities for things like phase 2 of Potrero and whatnot. And a lot of those types of fundings we would work with maybe like RCTC or some other agency that the federal government might require that we partner with somebody for something large scale. So we do look at those. They just don't typically come through for every department and every opportunity. CDBG is another example of that. It starts as federal money and comes through to the state and then gets sent on to the counties, and then the counties administer the programs.
Right. Okay, very good. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Frank?
No additional questions, no.
Okay. Mr. Ben-Gezra?
No comment, no questions.
Councilperson Carroll?
Thank you, Chair. Christina, great job on the grants. It's always very impressive when you do this run through. I do want to tell you that I've heard from other cities that are choosing to go after funding grants that you've already conquered in the past. So, and they mentioned that they've gotten the idea from the city. So you're doing a great job, although I don't welcome the competition on the grant. So I always have mixed emotions over the visibility of how impressive you're doing on the grant spectrum, because it's kind of like telling your competitors what you're doing, because there is competition for these grants. And when we're very specific about, where we've matched up the funding like this, it does kind of sometimes bode a little more competition in the future. But you did a great job. And the only other thing I guess I would ask is something that we never seem to have tapped into. And that is that there's a lot of grants that are available for, I don't know about the quantity of money, but for trees to be planted. And when we do work in the parks, or we're doing splash pad work, or when we're doing projects like, that kind of a natural shade is sometimes easier to maintain overall than replacing the shade sails and things like that we've been talking about. So I'd like to make sure that we at least consider good old natural trees that also take in some of the carbon and clean it up, as well as providing shade. And we can get some grant money maybe if you ever find an appropriate place for that.
Yes, ma'am. There are lots of urban greening grants, is what they call them. So I will add that to my list of things to keep my eyes on as I'm doing my weekly run through on what funds are available out there.
Okay, and I may have a question for you offline about another potential grant that I'll just give you a call about later, all right?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. You do a great.
Councilperson Martinez.
Yeah, I just want to comment to what a great job. Thank you so much for the detailed report, Christina. This committee was really talking about a lot of grants at the beginning, and I think when they look at the scope that we're really involved with, I think they appreciate that. I know I do. So thank you for the detail. And also because the public is going to start questioning as we go forward with some of our projects, about where else are we looking at besides just tax dollars. So thank you for this, because it shows that we are doing our diligence, looking for other funding sources. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all, Chair.
Christina, I have one question. You sort of said there may be some other opportunities out there. What's our limitation on being able to take advantage of those? What would we need to be able to get some of these other grants you see available?
So it really depends on what the grant is for, and the scale of the grant, and whether it requires matching or reimbursement or anything like that. So every grant has its own different criteria. So when we look at a grant and consider whether it's going to be a matching grant, obviously we need to know that the city has funding available for that, and it's also been identified as one of the priorities of council as to how they want to spend city's funding. When we look at reimbursable, we have to look and see, how much of it is reimbursable. Again, is the funding, prioritized within the department or within the city for whatever the program is for? And is it something that we're going to want to dedicate those funds for and that we have available to use? So those are sort of the two initial things that we look at. And then additionally, depending on the scale of the grant, like I mentioned earlier, some of the larger scale, transportation project type grants, sometimes those do require partnering with, like RCTC or maybe another agency of some type to administer the grant, or to have additional funding, or you have to cooperate with different agencies. And so that, when you get into more complex grant writing situations, you have to look at all those factors, and then it becomes, a collective where it's not just city staff working together on it, but you're working with outside agencies to try and secure funding for something that's of a regional benefit. So those are the primary things that we consider. A lot of the grants that we do write, city staff works on ourselves. So I work with Elizabeth in community services and transit, with Jeff for public works. Carrie Keyser does the waste management stuff. Code enforcement does their work for their AVA program. So a lot of what we have, city staff works very hard, either individually or collectively to write the grants and then administer the grant funding once we receive it.
Thank you for that explanation. Appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your report.
Thank you.
A motion to receive and file.
I move to receive and file the report as given.
Second.
I'll second.
Thanks, Frank. Roll call, please, Nicole.
Member Parks?
Yes.
Member Cooley?
Yes.
Member Bengesa?
Yes.
Vice Chair Beneke?
Yes.
Chair Janetti?
Yes.
Councilmember Carroll?
Yes.
Councilmember Martinez?
Yes.
Okay. Item number 4, ACH electronic funds transfer policy. The recommended action will be to review the ETF policy and either make recommended changes or recommend that the city council adopt the policy as drafted. Staff report. Jeff, I got you right this time.
Yeah, thank you. So what you have before you is an action item that we would need the finance committee to take some action to either move this forward. I guess there's a third option, and that is if there was enough of modifications necessary that we could bring it back to you a second time. So if there's small adjustments, we can make those and move forward. If there's any large adjustments, we might want to bring it back to the committee for another look. The bottom line is a little while back, and I say a little while back was last spring, the city was actually defrauded through a wire, through basically an electronic transfer mechanism where somebody, a party had come to the city and pretended to be one of our vendors, had requested a change in payment structure, basically to change the bank account information on where payments would be made, and then subsequently an invoice requested an invoice be paid, and that money was paid to the wrong party. The good news in that situation is the city was able to recover all but about between $50,000 and $60,000 of the money. So the good news is that the bank caught it, and the damage to the city was fairly limited. The bad news is that we didn't have processes in place to very clearly prevent that type of occurrence. This led to the creation of this policy. Lisa Leach is on this call and is able to answer specific questions, as she was the one that was the principal person drafting the policy. In any event, what we're trying to do with this policy is to make clear that both the setting up of an electronic payment structure and any modification subsequent to that requires us to go through processes that have a double check, even a triple check involved in it, to ensure that we are going back and checking with that vendor if there's a request and a change. If one of our departments is saying we want to wire money out, we're looking for a process to make sure that those processes are followed and that it's very clear that it can't happen unless there's that double check, triple check going on. We believe that the policy before you does that. This is also responsive to an audit finding that we had in the last audit. The single audit is this, the committee probably recalls, one of the audit findings was unauthorized wire transfers, and it detailed this particular issue that the city found itself subject to. While we have been operating under essentially this draft policy for several months now, this is now being brought forward after a few revisions that we made dealing with management of the city for finance committee review, and then hopefully ultimately council adoption as a formal policy. Just to kind of, before I turn it over to you for your observations and any potential changes, I think you heard that from the partner to the Poon firm who came and talked about it. And very clearly, this is something that other cities have been subject to, and successfully so. As we looked at, Lisa and I went to a conference of city finance officers a little while back, and they did actually a presentation talking about phishing exercises and different ways to defraud not only cities, but all other different government entities and private sector. So the good news is we're not alone. The bad news is we didn't have the steps that we needed. We believe this now takes us there. We still have to be diligent. Policies are only good if you follow them. And so it's really important that we always take a deep breath. We're fast. We have to move fast. There's a lot of transactions coming through, but we also have to be diligent, and we have to take the time to make sure that we're dotting our I's and crossing our T's. And I want to commend Lisa for putting the time and effort into this policy that we, again, have been acting under for several months. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over for any questions or observations from the committee. Thank you.
Nicole, is there any public comment or
No,
question?
I don't see any new attendees. Mr. Cooley, are you able to hit mute on your
Yeah, I have a
end?
question.
Go ahead, Steve.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Steve.
On page 4, outgoing EFTS, it says the banking information as reviewed by senior accountant for account accuracy. Then supporting documentation is then filed and stored in a secure office location. Are we maintaining paper records of this rather than storing it electronically, or are we creating a duplicate file?
Lisa, can you respond to that, please?
Yeah, we're actually maintaining it electronically through our Tyler accounting software program.
And does that allow us to save the source documents?
Is that allowed? Repeat that again, sorry.
Does the Tyler system allow us to save the source documents?
Yes, correct.
Okay, so then, is there any reason to have a hard copy somewhere? Shouldn't we be moving electronically and once those are converted electronically, get rid of them rather than have a paper file someone can access?
Correct, yeah.
Is it appropriate to strike that from this policy?
Yeah, I think that would be appropriate.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Chair, may I comment?
Yes, Nancy, go ahead.
Okay, I think probably we erred in policy on the side of caution. There was a time when we absolutely needed to make sure we had backup receipts. If electronic wasn't reliable, or we wanted to make sure that we built back the exact amounts that were appropriate. So we were super conservative about keeping the receipt. And I don't know how Councilmember Martinez feels about it, but maybe striking that from the policy needs to be reviewed to make sure we're comfortable with that.
Okay.
Yeah, I was,
Martinez?
this is Jeff. I'm sorry. I was just going to suggest that we modify that to maintained within city files, and that would allow for electronic storage or paper storage.
Thank you.
Councilmember Martinez, did you have a comment?
Well, I just wanted to say that would probably be a part of the retention file timeline that Nicole keeps, I would think, having a paper copy on file for a certain amount of time. But I would agree with that.
Okay. Richard, do you have any comment or question? Richard, you're on mute if you're trying to talk.
Sorry about that. I'm mute most of the time. But anyway, I kind of follow Councilwoman Carroll's thinking on this one, in the sense that I'm not necessarily thinking we need paper copies, but it would be good to have some kind of backup copy, because I know systems go down and things happen. And this is important to have at least some kind of a backup system, whether it be electronic backup, a disk file, whatever. Doesn't necessarily need to be paper, but it should be some kind of a backup system that we could have access to if something catastrophic happens to the system that we have in place. That's my thinking on it.
Okay.
May I speak to clarify?
Yes, go ahead, Nancy.
Yeah, I wasn't implying that we needed to keep a drawer full of paper receipts. So I mean, I agree, and I realize that it might have sounded a bit like that, but what I meant was that we might want to make sure that we're still continuing to err on the side of caution a little bit more maybe than some of the other organizations. So, and that's correct. I agree with you, Member Beneke, that, you know, we don't need to keep the paper flipped around.
Mr. Parks, Frank, do you have any comment or question?
Yeah, I have a question and a comment, to a modification. On page 5, second, or the first full paragraph, it says ACH overpayments require notification to the Citibank within 5 days, et cetera. My question is, do we have any frequency of overpayments? And if so, why?
Since I've been here, I haven't seen that we have overpayments. I think a lot of the language we put in the policy is trying to cover different scenarios and possibilities and what should our staff people do when that occurs. So I haven't seen any overpayments, but we wanted something like that in place in case it did happen in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Also on page 7, regarding when fraud is identified, I would suggest that there should also be a notification to the finance department chair.
Okay.
And that's all I have.
Thanks, Frank. Mr. Benghazi?
No comment.
Yeah, my only comment is it's a shame. I know it wasn't a lot of money. It could have been more, but we still paid a price to learn that we needed to do it a little better, and it looks like we've tightened the system up. Do I have a recommended action, a motion?
Well, Barry,
Yes.
Barry, I have a couple other comments.
Okay, Richard, go ahead.
I just weighed in on that one. Let me check my notes here. Oh, on page 6, C, a couple, 3 sentences down, it says the payment approval confirmation should be attached. I would be a little more affirmative in saying will be attached to the document, future reference. Should kind of makes it sound like, well, yeah, maybe, maybe not. That's just a word
Yeah.
clarification. You get that?
Yep.
Okay. And then just kind of in general, I think it was a great job. Putting this together, did a great job. I also think there needs to be in here some kind of periodic review of these procedures, only from the standpoint that technology changes, your bank may change. There's all kinds of things that could change down the road. And I think a periodic review, however long you think that's not, 12 months, 18 months, 24 months, but somewhere this document should be reviewed periodically to make sure it's current with the technology and any experience that we've had using this document over a period of time.
Yeah, I agree with that. Mm-hmm.
That's my thought on that.
Anything else, Richard?
No, that's it. Thanks, Barry.
Thank you. And thank you, Jeff, and especially Lisa for all the work putting this together and tightening our process up. Motion to recommend this policy with those couple of wordsmiths we did. Steve?
Yeah, I move to accept this as the amendments stated.
Second.
Second?
Second.
Okay. Roll call, please, Nicole.
Member Parks?
Yes.
Member Cooley?
Yes.
Member Bengesa?
Yes.
Vice Chair Beneke?
Yes.
Chair Janetti?
Yes.
Councilmember Carroll?
Yes.
Councilmember Martinez?
Yes.
Okay. Subcommittee updates. Has there been any update, Richard, from your perspective?
No, this COVID thing kind of put a halt to the working on the policy we're working on. So we'll get back to it. I haven't forgotten about it.
Okay. Steve, I'm going to ask you, we were working on the policy about inspecting some of the procedures that were commented about in the audit to make sure that the policies were being implemented. Where do we stand on that?
Because it's so difficult to access staff members and not being in the building, we're kind of the same thing. We're on a COVID hold.
Okay. And one comment I have, I know one of the things we had talked about of the list of 6 that the council requested us to look at was grants. And I'm wondering now, after a thorough briefing that we had by Christina tonight, if we think there's still a need for us to pursue that area, that I could tell the council that we feel that the process is pretty good, what they're doing right now. Probably the only thing holding them back is if they had more staff to be able to manage and write more grants.
Correct. I agree with that. What we're trying to see is what the grants were and where they're at. I think the spreadsheet sets that out very well and gives us a contact person in most instances if more information is needed. So I think that's probably been met.
Okay.
Barry, I would agree, and we got it into the process. Got it into the process now, where we'll be given an update. Hopefully maybe annually on these grants, so that we can continue to review them.
Okay. And I know Jeff was working to coordinate some investment people to come in with some ideas about investments, which again has been on hold because of the current COVID situation. I imagine when we get back to a normal operating, we can schedule that. But right now, I don't think there's room for it, and it's pretty awkward to have a meeting with those folks.
Mr. Chair, I think what we're hopeful to do is to at least look at the policy and be able to bring a policy to the Finance Committee. I'm hopeful that we can do that in July, at the latest August. We have been actually working on a policy. We've been looking at other cities and looking carefully at California finance rules and requirements. And I do believe we're going to be in a position to bring something by August at the latest, but hopefully July, so that at least the committee can get a good first look at where we are and what our options might be going forward.
Okay. Thanks, Jeff. Thank you for filling us in on that. Any other comments regarding the subcommittees? Okay. Ask for a roll call. Do we need a vote for that?
No,
oh no,
sir.
I'm a line behind here. Okay. Moving on. Future agenda items. I take it that'll be a future agenda item, maybe July or August. You'll have to let Nicole know, Jeff.
Yeah, I would like to put it on for July, and then I'm hopeful that we can do that. We are making good progress, and I think I can bring something to the committee that at least you can chew up, and even if it requires us to go back for a second round, this is important. It's an important change for the city right now. We invest very, very conservatively, and there are some options to expand that, and I certainly think it's a dialogue worth having.
Okay. Mr. Bengesa, were you trying to say something? I saw your the screen light up. You have a comment?
No, I have no comment. I have no question. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else with any future agenda items that we might consider?
Well, I'm still concerned about the finances of the city as we go forward with this COVID-19 and the shutdown and the quarantines and everything else going on. But I guess we'll need to give it a couple, 3 months and just see how things, bounce back. It looks like with the last jobs report, people going back to work. So we'll, I guess, have to wait and see just how it turns out in the end.
Yep. Okay. Meeting review, the treasurer. We covered a lot of ground tonight. We looked at some very positive information under the constraints we're having right now with the budget, that we see a surplus both with the general fund and with the wastewater fund, which is positive. We had a great update on the grants and understand the process that's going on and where the money is. Reviewed a very thorough EFT policy tonight that will be going before the council for their review, comment, and approval. And that's what I have for tonight. Jeff, do you have any comments?
Myself. Sorry, I was trying to unmute myself and struggled to do so. Just real quickly, thank you. I think, I've taken a good amount of your time tonight. We did, as you know, the committee last time around had recommended a new audit firm. The city council has agreed with that and has approved the contract with Rams. So we are moving forward with them. And actually, Lisa and I have already been having scheduled calls and got document requests. I mean, these guys do not wait. And so I'm very pleased that the early indication is that they're going to be a very proactive firm. So I'm hopeful that our early indication results in us meeting some really good time windows. We had a very lengthy call with them today. So that's very pleasing. And I thank the committee for moving that forward to the council. And then the council did approve the fiscal year 21 budget at their last meeting, and that budget is trimmed down a bit. We did have to make some cuts in order to balance the general fund budget, but at the end of it, I feel very confident that it's a conservative budget, and unless the other shoe drops and we have a double dip of significance in this COVID-19, I do feel like the budget is very sustainable and that it will provide for us to move forward in a reasonable way. And so those are the only comments I had today, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Jeff. And I would just like to go along with the information was presented to the council last meeting on the audit selection process, and they were pleased. I could let Nancy, Carol, or Julio comment, but I'm going to say this. I want to thank Steve for a lot of work that he did in doing some research behind here in the process, and Jeff and Lisa. It was a great thing. It completed one of our subcommittee tasks. So thank you to the team that did that. Really good job, and we'll move on from there. I guess if there's no other comments, I see that I am at the last item there.